136 years ago, German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck invited the rest of Western Europe to the Berlin Conference. The task? To carve up the map of Africa with total disregard for cultural, political, ethnic, or linguistic differences, and without a single African at the table. Among other things, this led to one of the greatest mass murders in history by the king of one of Europe's smallest states. Here's how it happened. The leaders of the Berlin Conference hoped that by chopping Africa up and deciding artificial and arbitrary lines among themselves, they could avoid fighting with each other over who owned what, and could civilize local populations with Christianity. While unexplored countries were given mostly to nations, there was one exception. It's the country now called the Democratic Republic of Congo, but at the Berlin Conference, it was named the Congo Free State, and handed over as the personal property of Belgium's King Leopold II. He agreed to send over Christian missionaries and turn the territory into a free trade area for all of Europe, as well as to help the local population. But the Congo Free State became anything but free for the people that lived there. A worldwide boom in rubber meant that Leopold II could cash in big time, but tapping rubber from trees was back-breaking work. So to source enough labor, Leopold effectively turned all of the Congo into a slave plantation. The labor policy was known by some as the red rubber system, and it was designed to maximize extraction. The system was enforced by the Force Publique, Leopold's private colonial army, a 19,000-man military with white officers and black soldiers from as far as Zanzibar, Nigeria, Liberia, and even the Congo. Many of the soldiers had been kidnapped in raids on villages in their childhood and brought to Roman Catholic missions where they received military training. They were armed with modern weapons and the chicote, a bullwhip made of hippopotamus hide. Villagers were asked to meet insane rubber quotas. If a village didn't meet its targets, the military were expected to take hostages and shoot them. Women in villages were often held hostage or raped to speed up production. Severed limbs of villagers had to be produced as evidence that each bullet fired had been used to kill a villager. So, if a soldier missed a shot, they would often cut off the hand of an innocent victim just so they could produce a limb to show their superiors. If individuals in a village refused to work, they were beaten or shot, and the village was razed to the ground. The red rubber system led to the collapse of economic and cultural life for the Congolese. A system so cruel that female hostages often starved while men were worked to death. Those that tried to flee into forests often died of hunger. Tens of thousands were shot in failed uprisings, and because farming had been disrupted, local Congolese were susceptible to famine and disease. The precise figures are not known, but estimates suggest that between 1880 and 1920, at least 10 million people, or 50% of the entire population, died. Leopold II never set foot in the Congo. But aside from murdering half of its population, he also imported 267 men, women, and children to set up a human zoo on the grounds of his country estate in Belgium. There, they were displayed behind a fence and assigned to zoo visitors which read, "Don't feed the animals." Horror stories from missionaries eventually spread to Europe, and Leopold was forced to sell the Congo Free State to the Belgian government in 1908. The red rubber system was outlawed. But even though labor practices weren't as brutal as they were under Leopold II, many of his racist and exploitative practices continued to be implemented. The administration that ran the Congo Free State wasn't even replaced. 50 years after Leopold's human zoo, Belgium built another mock African village at the 1958 Belgium World Fair. The Congolese who traveled to Belgium thought they were part of a cultural exchange, but they found themselves part of a live display behind a fence. 52 years after Belgium took control of the country, the Congo won its independence in 1960. Despite Belgium's bloody history in the Congo, Belgians were taught that their country had brought civilization to Africa and that Leopold was a foundational figure for decades. Streets and parks have been named after him, and statues of him exist around the country. But in recent years, this narrative has come under fire. In the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests, young Belgians protested Leopold II's statues. And for the first time in 112 years, Belgium's King Philippe expressed regret for the suffering and humiliation his nation inflicted on the region. But he still didn't go as far as to apologize for the atrocity.